You stopped chasing and the silence is killing them. Not because they miss your pursuit, though they do, more than they'll admit, but because the silence means you're done, you've given up, you've moved on in ways that feel permanent and irreversible. And now that you've stopped, now that the dynamic has shifted from you pursuing and them withdrawing, to both of you being absent from each other's lives, there's something specific the avoidant is hoping you'll say. Something they'll never ask for directly, because asking would require admitting they want it, admitting they need you, admitting that your stopping has created panic in them they can't manage. But the hope is there, quiet and desperate beneath their defended exterior. They're hoping you'll reach out and say the exact combination of words that would make them feel safe enough to stop running, while making it clear enough that you're not chasing anymore, that their fear of being consumed doesn't activate. They want you to thread an impossible needle, to show you still care without pressuring them, to demonstrate you're available without pursuing them, to communicate that the door is open without making them feel obligated to walk through it immediately. What they're hoping for is rescue that doesn't look like rescue, connection that doesn't feel like trap, love that doesn't trigger their terror of being needed. The specific thing they're hoping you'll say isn't one sentence or one message. It's a tone, an approach, a way of reaching out that probably doesn't exist, because what they want is contradictory. They want you to want them without wanting them too much, to pursue them without chasing them, to make it clear you're interested while making it equally clear you'll be fine if they're not interested back. The impossibility of what they're hoping for is why they'll probably never hear it, why even if you somehow manage to say exactly what they're secretly hoping for, they might not recognize it or might not be capable of responding to it the way part of them wants to respond. But understanding what they're hoping for reveals something crucial about their psychology, that underneath the defended state is someone who wants connection desperately while being terrified of it. Someone who's hoping you'll make connection possible by removing all the risk that connection typically involves. Someone who wants you to do the impossible work of making them feel safe enough to let you in. The exact words they're hoping to hear that they'd never admit to wanting. They're hoping you'll say something like, "I understand why you needed distance, and I'm not angry about it. I see you're scared, and I get it. I'm not going to pressure you or chase you, but I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. Not waiting around, not putting my life on hold, but genuinely open to hearing from you if you want to reach out. No expectations, no pressure. Just openness." These words would give them everything their psychology is desperate for. Acknowledgement of their fear without judgment, space without abandonment, availability without pursuit, connection without pressure. The words would communicate that you see their defended state as defense rather than as rejection of you, that you understand their withdrawal is about their fear rather than about your inadequacy, that you're not taking their distance personally, but you're also not closing the door permanently. They're hoping you'll say something that validates their experience without requiring them to validate yours. I know relationships are hard for you. I know intimacy feels dangerous. I know you pull away when things get too close. I see that about you, and I don't need you to be different than you are right now. This validation would be incredibly powerful because it would communicate that you see their patterns without condemning their patterns, that you understand their limitations without requiring them to immediately overcome their limitations, that you accept them as they currently are rather than only accepting the version of them they could become if they did years of therapy. The validation removes the pressure to perform, to be different, to meet standards they're not capable of meeting. And removing pressure is what would make them feel safest, what would create the conditions where they might actually be able to move toward you rather than away from you. They're hoping you'll communicate that you have your own life and you're fine, while somehow also communicating that you miss them and want them. I'm doing really well. I'm happy, I'm engaged with my life, I have good things happening. And I still think about you. I still value what we had. If you ever want to talk, I'd like that. But I'm genuinely okay either way. This balance is nearly impossible to strike because it requires communicating two things that seem contradictory, that you're fine without them and that you want them. But this contradictory message is exactly what the avoidance psychology needs to hear. They need to know you're fine because if you're not fine, your need of them creates pressure. But they also need to know you want them because if you're completely fine, it means they don't matter, and not mattering triggers their abandonment wound. The perfect balance would communicate, you matter to me and I don't need you, both things simultaneously, held in tension without contradiction. They're secretly hoping you'll take responsibility for the relationship ending in ways that let them off the hook. I know I came on too strong. I know I had expectations that were probably too much too fast. I know I pressured you and that made you withdraw. I'm sorry for my part in how things went. This apology would allow them to avoid facing their own role in the relationship. Failing would let them maintain their defensive narrative that the problem was your neediness, rather than their avoidance. Would give them someone else to blame, so they don't have to face their own patterns. The apology would feel like relief, because it would mean they don't have to feel guilty, don't have to acknowledge their incapacity, don't have to face that they destroyed something good through their defended state. But this is the most toxic thing they're hoping for, because it's hoping for you to sacrifice truth to maintain their defenses, hoping for you to take responsibility that's actually theirs, hoping for you to enable their avoidance by confirming their distorted view of what went wrong. Why these hoped-for words reveal their fundamental incapacity. The words the avoidant is hoping to hear reveal that what they want is relationship without vulnerability, connection without risk, love without the possibility of being hurt. Every variation of what they're hoping you'll say is designed to eliminate the aspects of relationship that feel dangerous to them, the need, the dependency, the vulnerability, the possibility of rejection or abandonment. They want you to create conditions where they can have connection with you without having to risk anything, without having to be vulnerable, without having to face their fear of intimacy. But relationship doesn't work that way. Real connection requires mutual vulnerability, requires both people risking rejection, requires both people being willing to need each other and to admit that need. The avoidant wanting connection without vulnerability is like wanting to swim without getting wet. It's wanting the benefit without accepting the inherent requirements that come with the benefit. What they're hoping you'll say also reveals they want you to do all the emotional labor, to be the one who reaches out, to be the one who creates safety, to be the one who makes connection possible while they remain passive and protected. They're hoping you'll construct the entire framework within which reconnection could happen, hoping you'll remove all the obstacles to connection that their fear creates, hoping you'll make it so easy and so safe that they can just step into connection without having to do any of the scary work of making themselves vulnerable. But this dynamic is exactly what didn't work in the relationship. You doing all the work while they contributed nothing, you creating all the safety while they just received it without reciprocating. The words they're hoping for would recreate the exact imbalanced dynamic that made the relationship unsustainable, would put you back in the position of doing everything while they do nothing. The hoped-for words reveal the avoidant wants certainty before they'll take any risk. They want to know you'll be there, know you won't hurt them, know the connection will be safe before they're willing to move toward connection. But certainty doesn't exist in relationships. All connection involves risk. All vulnerability involves possibility of being hurt. All intimacy requires stepping into unknown without guarantees. Healthy people accept this uncertainty and move toward connection anyway, because connection is worth the risk. But the avoidant won't move toward connection without guarantees that can't be given, won't be vulnerable without certainty that vulnerability won't lead to pain, won't risk unless the risk has been eliminated, which means they won't actually risk at all. They're hoping you'll somehow provide certainty that would make connection safe enough for them to attempt. But you can't provide that certainty because it doesn't exist, and their need for it before they'll try is evidence of incapacity rather than evidence of reasonable caution. What they're hoping to hear also reveals they want connection on their timeline, at their pace, completely controlled by them. The hoped-for words all include some version of when you're ready, if you want to, no pressure. All language that gives them complete control over whether and when connection happens. They want you available when they decide they're ready, but they don't want to commit to ever being ready, don't want to have timeline for readiness, don't want any accountability for whether they actually pursue the connection they're claiming to want. This is control disguised as need for safety, and wanting complete control over the other person's availability while maintaining your own unavailability is not foundation for partnership. It's foundation for dynamic, where one person has all the power and the other person is just waiting around hoping to be chosen, hoping to be deemed ready for, hoping to be granted access when the controlling person decides to grant it. What you should actually say instead of what they're hoping for. If you've stopped chasing and you're considering reaching out, what you should say is the truth, not the truth shaped to make them comfortable, not the truth softened to avoid triggering their defenses, but the actual truth about what you experienced and what you need. Something like, I stopped chasing because chasing was hurting me. I stopped pursuing because the pursuit was one-sided and I deserve reciprocity. I'm not available for the dynamic we had where I did all the work and you did none. If you want to try again, I need to see evidence of real change. Therapy attended consistently for months. Capacity demonstrated through sustained different behavior. Willingness to be vulnerable in ways you weren't willing before. Without that evidence, I'm not interested in reconnecting, because reconnecting without change would just recreate what didn't work. This truth doesn't give them what they're hoping for. It doesn't make them safe. It doesn't remove pressure. It doesn't let them off the hook. But it's honest, and honesty is what you owe yourself, even if it's not what they want to hear. You should say something that holds them accountable, rather than validating their defended state. Your fear is understandable, but it's not an excuse for how you treated me. Your patterns are yours to address through therapy, not mine to accommodate indefinitely. I see that you're scared, and I have compassion for that. But compassion doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. You hurt me through your inability to show up, and that hurt is real regardless of why you couldn't show up. This accountability is the opposite of what they're hoping for. They're hoping you'll absolve them, understand them into a place where they don't have to face what they did. But absolving them doesn't help them, and it certainly doesn't help you. They need to face that their patterns have impact, that their defended state hurts people, that understanding why they are the way they are doesn't erase the pain they cause. You should communicate your actual boundary rather than the soft availability they're hoping for. I'm not leaving the door open indefinitely. I'm not available whenever you decide you might be ready. I'm moving forward with my life, and that means I'm open to connecting with people who can meet me now, not people who might be able to meet me someday if they do work they're not currently doing. If you want to reach out, you can, but I'm not promising I'll be available when you do. I'm not waiting around, and I'm not interested in being option you keep on standby while you decide whether you can overcome your fear. This boundary is harsh compared to what they're hoping for, but it's true and it's healthy. You're not required to stay available to someone who proved they can't meet you. You're not obligated to be their backup plan. You're allowed to move forward, and moving forward means accepting that they might reach out when you're no longer interested in hearing from them. You might say nothing at all, which is the response they're least hoping for, but might be the healthiest response for you. Saying nothing maintains your boundary of not chasing, communicates through silence that you're done, protects you from being pulled back into hoping or waiting, or making yourself available to someone who's demonstrated they can't receive your availability in healthy ways. The nothing at all is powerful because it's not giving them any opening, not providing any reassurance, not creating any conditions under which they could safely return. It's just complete absence that forces them to sit with the consequences of their patterns without you relieving those consequences through reaching out. What they're hoping you'll say assumes you'll reach out. But maybe the best thing you can say is nothing, and let the silence teach them what words never taught them. The reality of what happens if you give them what they're hoping for. If you somehow manage to say exactly what the avoidant is secretly hoping for. If you gave them the validation without accountability, the availability without pursuit, the connection without pressure. What would happen is they'd feel relief temporarily, and then they'd repeat exactly the same patterns that made you stop chasing in the first place. They'd feel safe enough to reconnect because you made it safe. They'd come back into your life because you removed all the risk. They'd allow closeness because you promised not to require anything from them. And then, once they were back, once the connection was reestablished, once things started feeling intimate again, their fear would activate and they'd withdraw, just like they withdrew before. Because what they're hoping you'll say doesn't address their actual problem, which is their incapacity for sustained intimacy. It just creates temporary conditions where their incapacity isn't triggered. But the incapacity is still there, and it will reassert itself as soon as intimacy deepens enough to feel threatening again. Giving them what they're hoping for also recreates the exact power dynamic that made the relationship unhealthy. You'd be back in the position of managing their fear, creating their safety, doing all the emotional labor to make connection possible while they contribute nothing but their defended presence. You'd be accommodating their limitations while they make no effort to address those limitations. You'd be meeting them where they are while they make no effort to meet you where you are. The dynamic would be inherently unbalanced, inherently unsustainable, inherently destined to fail again. Because you can't maintain relationship where one person does everything and the other person just receives what's being done without reciprocating the effort. If you gave them what they're hoping for, you'd also be teaching them that their patterns work, that they can push people away and those people will still be available when the avoidant is ready, that they can withdraw without consequence, that they don't have to change because people will accept them as they are indefinitely. The teaching would ensure they never pursue therapy, never address their patterns, never develop capacity they don't currently have. Why would they do the hard work of therapy if they can have connection without doing that work? Why would they face their fear if you're willing to create conditions where they never have to face it? Giving them what they're hoping for would be enabling their avoidance, making it easier for them to stay exactly as they are, preventing the pain of consequences that might actually motivate growth. What would also happen is you'd end up hurt again, except this time it would hurt more. The first time the relationship failed, you could tell yourself maybe you didn't understand their patterns, maybe you didn't give them the right conditions, maybe if you'd approached it differently it would have worked. But if you give them what they're hoping for, and it still doesn't work, which it won't, because what they're hoping for doesn't address their incapacity, you'll have to face that nothing you say or do can make them capable of partnership. That the problem isn't your approach, or your words, or your availability. The problem is their fundamental incapacity that won't change without intensive therapeutic work they're not pursuing. That realization is more painful than the first ending, because it closes the door on hope, forces acceptance that there's nothing you could have done differently, proves that the relationship was never going to work regardless of how perfectly you tried to meet them. What the avoidant should be hoping for instead, but isn't. The avoidant should be hoping for confrontation that forces them to face themselves. They should be hoping you'll say something like, "Your patterns are destroying your relationships and you need professional help. I can't fix you. I can't make you capable of intimacy. I can't do the work for you. You need therapy. You need it urgently." And until you pursue it and sustain it and demonstrate through changed behavior that it's working, you're not capable of healthy relationship with me or with anyone. This confrontation would be gift because it would name the truth clearly, would point them toward the help they need, would make clear that their patterns are the problem and their work is the solution. But the avoidant isn't hoping for this confrontation because it's uncomfortable, because it requires them to admit they're broken in ways they can't fix themselves, because it destroys their defensive narratives about the relationship failing due to external factors rather than due to their internal incapacity. They should be hoping to hear boundaries that force them to experience consequences, rather than hoping for availability that removes consequences. They should be hoping you'll say, "I'm completely done. I'm not available for reconnection. I'm not interested in trying again. Your patterns hurt me and I'm protecting myself by ensuring you can't hurt me again, which means you're cut off permanently." These boundaries would force them to sit with the full weight of what their patterns cost them, would eliminate the comfort of knowing you're still available if they decide they want you, would create the pain of permanent loss that sometimes motivates avoidants to pursue therapy when temporary pain doesn't motivate them. But they're not hoping for permanent boundaries, because permanent boundaries are painful, and their hoping is driven by wanting relief from pain rather than wanting growth that comes through pain. The avoidant should be hoping for you to prioritize yourself completely. I'm moving on with someone who can meet me. I'm building life with someone capable of partnership. I'm done thinking about you, done hoping for you, done being available to you in any capacity. You're my past, and I'm focused on my future. This complete moving on would force them to face that you're not waiting, you're not available, you're not an option they can return to when they feel ready. The forcing would eliminate false comfort that keeps them from having to face their patterns urgently. But they're not hoping for this because this would mean losing you permanently. And even though they can't be with you, they want to keep you as option, as possibility, as person who might still be available in future when their fear is less or their capacity is more. They should be hoping for truth that serves your healing rather than hoping for words that serve their defense. You loving me while being incapable of showing it doesn't change that I need to be shown love. You having reasons for your patterns doesn't mean I should accept the impact of your patterns. You being hurt by your past doesn't obligate me to be hurt by your present. I'm choosing myself. I'm choosing people who can choose me back. I'm choosing to build life where I'm loved in ways I can feel rather than in ways that stay hidden behind someone's defended state. This truth would be about you and your needs rather than about them and their comfort. But they're not hoping for this because it doesn't center them, doesn't make them feel better, doesn't create conditions where they can have connection without having to grow. The deeper truth about what they're really hoping for. What the avoidant is really hoping for underneath the specific words is someone who will fix them without them having to do the work of fixing themselves. They're hoping for love that heals their wounds, for connection that makes them feel safe enough to be vulnerable, for a relationship that transforms them without them having to pursue transformation through therapy. They're hoping for magical solution, where the right person saying the right things in the right way creates the right conditions that allow them to overcome their fear and their patterns, without having to do the painful work of therapy. But magical solutions don't exist. Love doesn't heal attachment wounds. Therapy heals attachment wounds. Connection doesn't make you safe enough to be vulnerable. Developing capacity for vulnerability through therapeutic work makes you safe enough to be vulnerable. The right person can't fix you. You can only fix yourself through sustained professional help. They're also hoping for a relationship that requires nothing from them while giving them everything they need. They want to be understood without having to explain themselves. They want to be accepted without having to be accountable. They want to be loved without having to be vulnerable. They want connection without having to risk rejection. They want intimacy without having to tolerate the discomfort that intimacy creates. What they're hoping for is entirely one-sided. You do all the understanding, all the accepting, all the loving, all the risk-taking, all the discomfort tolerating, while they just receive all of it without reciprocating any of it. But relationship doesn't work that way. Partnership requires mutuality, requires both people contributing, requires both people being vulnerable and taking risks, and tolerating discomfort. What they're hoping for isn't relationship. It's fantasy where they get benefit of connection without any of the requirements that connection entails. What they're really hoping for is to not have to change while still getting to keep you. They want you to adjust to their limitations rather than them having to overcome their limitations. They want you to make the relationship work despite their incapacity, rather than them having to develop capacity. They want you to sacrifice your needs so they don't have to meet your needs. The hoping is fundamentally about them avoiding growth while maintaining access to what growth would give them. Access to you, to partnership, to the connection they want. But you can't grow for them. You can't want their growth more than they want it. You can't do their therapy for them. Their hope that you'll make connection possible while they stay exactly as they are is hope that's guaranteed to lead to disappointment, because you staying exactly as you were, accommodating, understanding, patient, is what made the relationship fail the first time. The only thing that would make reconnection viable is them changing. And they're not hoping to change, they're hoping to not have to change while somehow still getting different outcome. Why you should care more about what you need to say than what they hope to hear. What you need to say is more important than what they hope to hear, because your healing, your growth, your future depends on you speaking your truth, not on you managing their comfort. If you shape what you say around what they're hoping to hear, you're still organizing yourself around them, still making their needs more important than your needs, still sacrificing your truth to make them comfortable. The pattern that made the relationship fail was you accommodating them while they accommodated nothing. Speaking what they hope to hear would be continuing that pattern, would be you suppressing what you actually need to say to give them what they want to hear. But your words are yours, your truth is yours, and you owe yourself the expression of that truth regardless of whether it's what they're hoping for. What you need to say might be anger they're not hoping to hear. I'm furious that you wasted my time. I'm angry that you took my patience for granted. I'm pissed that you let me invest in a relationship you knew you couldn't sustain. The anger is valid, is real, is yours to express, and expressing it serves your healing by letting you release what you've been holding, by letting you name the impact they had, by letting you take back power through refusing to protect them from the truth of how their behavior affected you. They're not hoping to hear your anger because anger makes them uncomfortable. But your anger isn't about their comfort, it's about your healing. Speak it. What you need to say might be grief they're not hoping to hear. I'm heartbroken about what we could have been if you'd been capable. I'm sad about the future we could have had if you'd done your work. I'm grieving the relationship I wanted that we'll never have because you can't meet me. The grief is yours to express, is part of your process, is piece of moving through the loss. Expressing it helps you move through it rather than staying stuck in it. They're not hoping to hear your grief because it creates guilt. But your grief isn't about managing their guilt. It's about honoring your loss. Speak it. What you need to say might be clarity they're not hoping to hear. I see exactly what happened. I see that you're incapable of intimacy without intensive therapy. I see that your patterns will destroy every relationship you're in until you address them professionally. I see that loving you doesn't make you capable of loving me back in ways that create partnership. I see all of this clearly, and that clarity is why I'm done. The clarity is power, is insight, is understanding that serves your ability to move forward without doubt or second guessing. They're not hoping to hear your clarity because clarity destroys their defensive narratives. But your clarity isn't about preserving their narratives. It's about grounding yourself in truth that prevents you from being manipulated back into hoping or waiting. Speak it. The final truth about what they're hoping to hear and why it doesn't matter. The final truth is that what the avoidant is secretly hoping you'll say reveals their incapacity more than it reveals anything about what would actually help the relationship. They're hoping for words that would make them comfortable rather than words that would make them grow. They're hoping for approach that would protect their defended state rather than approach that would challenge their defended state. They're hoping for you to create conditions where they don't have to change, while somehow still getting to maintain connection with you. All of this hoping is about them avoiding the one thing that would actually make reconnection viable. Intensive therapy that develops their capacity for intimacy, vulnerability, and sustained presence. The words they're hoping for would let them avoid therapy while maintaining access to you. But avoiding therapy while maintaining access to you is exactly what didn't work before, what won't work now, what will never work because their incapacity is the problem, and therapy is the solution, and no combination of words you could say changes that fundamental reality. The final truth is also that even if you said exactly what they're hoping for, even if you threaded the impossible needle of showing you care without pressuring them, even if you created perfect conditions of availability without pursuit, they still probably couldn't receive it in healthy ways because their capacity hasn't changed. What they're hoping for assumes that the right words would unlock their capacity, would make them able to be vulnerable, would transform their fear into courage. But words don't create capacity. Words might create temporary safety that allows temporary connection. But capacity that sustains connection long term is built through years of therapeutic work, through processing attachment wounds, through developing emotional regulation and distress tolerance, an ability to be vulnerable without being consumed by vulnerability. They haven't done that work. The words they're hoping for can't substitute for that work, and hoping for words that would make work unnecessary is hoping for something that can't exist. What the avoidant is secretly hoping you'll say when you stop chasing them is, make me safe enough to not run, want me enough to be available, understand me enough to not have expectations, love me enough to accept my limitations, care for me enough to do all the work, while I do none. Be there for me when I'm ready, while accepting I might never be ready. Give me connection without requiring vulnerability. Give me intimacy without requiring risk. Give me relationship without requiring growth. They're hoping for the impossible. They're hoping for you to fix what only therapy can fix. They're hoping for love to heal what love can't heal. They're hoping to not have to change while still getting different outcome. And understanding what they're hoping for helps you understand why you should absolutely not give it to them. Because giving them what they're hoping for would enable their avoidance, would sacrifice your needs to their defended comfort, would recreate the dynamic that didn't work, would prevent the consequences that might motivate them to finally pursue the help they desperately need. Let them hope, let them want, let them secretly wish you'll say the magic words that make everything okay without them having to grow. And you say what you need to say, your truth, your anger, your grief, your boundaries, your clarity that their patterns are theirs to address, and you're done accommodating patterns that hurt you. What they're hoping to hear doesn't matter. What you need to say does. Say it. How they're hoping reveals they're still not taking responsibility. The fact that the avoidant is hoping you'll reach out, hoping you'll say specific things, hoping you'll create the conditions for reconnection, reveals they're still in passive mode, still expecting you to do the work, still not taking ownership of their role in the relationship ending. If they were taking responsibility, they wouldn't be hoping for you to say something. They'd be reaching out themselves. They'd be doing the vulnerable work of initiating contact, of expressing what they feel, of acknowledging what they did wrong and what they're doing to change it. But they're not doing any of that. They're hoping you'll do it. They're waiting for you to bridge the gap they created, to fix what they broke, to make reconnection possible while they remain passive. The hoping is continuation of the pattern that destroyed the relationship. Them being passive while expecting you to be active, them withholding while expecting you to pursue, them doing nothing while hoping you'll do everything. Their hoping also reveals they believe the problem was the dynamic rather than their capacity. They think if you just approached them differently, if you just said the right things, if you just created the right conditions, the relationship could work. But the problem was never about approach or conditions. The problem was their fundamental incapacity for sustained intimacy, their inability to be vulnerable, their patterns of withdrawal whenever connection deepened. No approach fixes incapacity. No words create capacity. No conditions make someone able to do what they're not capable of doing. They're hoping for a solution that doesn't require them to change because they're still not accepting that they're what needs to change. that their patterns are what destroyed the relationship. That different outcome requires different them, and different them requires years of therapy they're not pursuing. The hoping reveals they're still centered on their needs rather than on your needs. Everything they're hoping you'll say is about making them comfortable, making them feel safe, removing pressure from them, protecting them from having to face their patterns. There's no consideration in their hoping about what you need, what would serve your healing, what would protect you from being hurt again. The hoping is entirely self-focused. How can you make this easier for me? How can you create conditions where I don't have to be uncomfortable? How can you give me connection without requiring me to grow? If they were considering your needs, they'd be hoping for something different. They'd be hoping you're protecting yourself, hoping you're requiring high standards, hoping you're not available to them until they've done extensive work to become worthy of another chance. But that's not what they're hoping for, because they're still only thinking about themselves. Their hoping also reveals they expect you to understand them better than they understand themselves. They want you to know they're scared without them having to say they're scared. They want you to recognize they're wounded without them having to share their wounds vulnerably. They want you to accommodate their limitations without them having to articulate what their limitations are or why they have them. They're hoping you'll be mind reader, will intuitive know exactly what they need and exactly how to provide it without them having to do the vulnerable work of communicating their needs directly. But expecting someone to understand you better than you understand yourself, expecting someone to meet needs you won't articulate, expecting someone to accommodate limitations you won't acknowledge. This is emotional laziness disguised as hope. It's hoping for you to do their emotional work for them, to be more attuned to them than they're willing to be to themselves. What happens to them as the hoping continues without fulfillment? As time passes and you don't say what they're hoping for, as you either say nothing at all or say something that holds them accountable rather than making them comfortable, the hoping starts to transform into something more toxic. Initially, the hope is specific. They're hoping you'll reach out, hoping you'll say certain things, hoping reconnection is possible on terms that feel safe to them. But when the hoping isn't fulfilled, when you remain silent, or when what you say isn't what they were hoping for, the hope starts curdling into resentment. They start resenting you for not understanding what they needed, for not creating the conditions that would have made reconnection possible, for not doing the work of bridging the gap they created. The resentment is completely unfair. They're resenting you for not reading their mind, not accommodating needs they never expressed, not pursuing them after they pushed you away. But fair or unfair, the resentment is what the unfulfilled hope becomes, and the resentment is what eventually hardens into permanent bitterness. The unfulfilled hoping also deepens their conviction that relationships don't work, that people can't be trusted, that vulnerability always leads to pain. They're interpreting your not saying what they hoped as evidence that you didn't really understand them, didn't really care, weren't really committed to the relationship. They're using your failure to provide what they were secretly hoping for as proof that they were right to be defended, right to maintain distance, right to protect themselves against intimacy. The interpretation is completely backwards. You not saying what they hoped doesn't prove relationships don't work. It proves that they have unreasonable expectations, that they want things they won't ask for, that they expect others to meet needs they won't articulate. But the backwards interpretation is what's happening, and it's reinforcing their defensive patterns rather than challenging them. The hoping that remains unfulfilled is also keeping them stuck in the past with you, rather than allowing them to move forward. They can't fully let go because they're still hoping you'll reach out, still waiting to hear what they want to hear, still holding space for possibility of reconnection on their terms. The hoping is preventing grieving. They can't grieve the loss of you fully because grief requires acceptance that something is over. And they haven't accepted it's over because they're still hoping. So they're trapped in limbo, can't move forward because they're hoping you'll come back, can't go back because you're not providing what they're hoping for. The limbo is uncomfortable, but it's familiar, and familiar discomfort is easier than unfamiliar work of actually changing. So the hoping continues, keeping them stuck, preventing them from doing the therapeutic work that would develop their capacity, ensuring they'll repeat these same patterns with the next person because they never processed what happened with you. As the hoping continues unfulfilled, it also becomes fantasy that's more about them than about you. They start imagining versions of you reaching out, imagining what you'd say, imagining how they'd respond. The imagined version of reconnection becomes more real to them than actual relationship was, becomes story they tell themselves about what could happen if the stars aligned just right. The fantasy is comforting because in fantasy they control everything, control what you say, control how safe they feel, control the outcome. But the fantasy is also a trap because it's keeping them engaged with imaginary relationship rather than with reality. That relationship is over, that you've moved on, that what they're hoping for isn't coming. The fantasy becomes substitute for actual connection. And substituting fantasy for reality is how they'll spend years stuck on you instead of doing the work to become someone capable of real relationship with anyone. What your silence or your truth is teaching them that they're hoping can't learn. Your silence, if you've chosen to say nothing, is teaching them what they're hoping can't teach. That some consequences are permanent. That some people leave and don't come back. That taking people for granted eventually results in losing those people in ways that can't be undone. The silence is lesson delivered through absence, through the experience of wanting to hear from you and not hearing, through the daily confrontation with the fact that you're gone and not returning. Words could tell them these things, but they could dismiss words, could rationalize them, could defend against them. Silence can't be dismissed. Silence is just absence that continues, that accumulates, that proves through sheer duration that you meant what your stopping chasing communicated. You're done. If you've chosen to speak truth instead of silence, if you've said what you needed to say rather than what they hoped to hear, the truth is teaching them different lesson, that they hurt you in ways that matter, that their patterns have real impact on real people, that loving someone doesn't make you capable of being with them if you can't do what being with them requires. Your truth is holding up mirror that shows them themselves in ways their hoping was designed to avoid seeing. The hoping wanted you to validate them, to make them comfortable, to absolve them of responsibility. Your truth does opposite. It names their impact, makes them uncomfortable with what they did, holds them responsible for the hurt they caused. The truth is harder to dismiss than silence, because truth contains specifics, contains evidence, contains your experience that contradicts their defensive narratives. Your silence or your truth is also teaching them that you're serious about your boundaries in ways that their previous experiences with people haven't taught them. Most people the avoidant has been with have talked about boundaries while not enforcing them, have threatened to leave while staying, have expressed hurt while continuing to accommodate. But you're different. You stopped chasing and you stayed stopped. You set boundary and you maintained it. You said you were done and you're actually done. The seriousness is teaching them that not everyone is willing to tolerate what they've gotten away with before, that some people actually enforce consequences, that your boundaries aren't negotiable or flexible or temporary. Learning this might not change them. They might just find someone else with weaker boundaries. But at least they're learning that their patterns don't work with everyone, that some people have standards they can't meet and will leave rather than lowering their standards. Your silence or truth is teaching them what it feels like to be on the receiving end of withdrawal, to want someone who won't make themselves available, to reach towards someone who's pulled away. They've spent the relationship withdrawing while you pursued, creating distance while you tried to close it, being unavailable while you remained available. Now the positions are reversed. You're the one who's withdrawn, unavailable, distant, and they're experiencing what you experienced, the frustration, the powerlessness, the pain of wanting someone who won't engage. The experiencing might create empathy, might help them understand what they put you through, or it might just create resentment that you're doing to them what they did to you. Either way, they're learning through direct experience what their patterns feel like from the other side. And experiential learning is more powerful than conceptual learning, even if it doesn't always lead to growth. Why the healthiest thing you can do is ignore what they're hoping for entirely. The healthiest thing you can do is organize your response, whether that's silence or words, around what serves your healing, rather than around what serves their comfort. What they're hoping to hear would serve their comfort, would protect their defended state, would allow them to avoid facing their patterns. But what serves your healing might be exactly opposite of what they're hoping for. Your healing might require you to express anger they're not hoping to hear. Your healing might require boundaries that eliminate their hoped-for availability. Your healing might require truth that destroys their defensive narratives. Choose your healing over their hoping every single time, because your healing is what allows you to move forward into relationships that actually work, while their hoping keeps them stuck in patterns that prevent them from having relationships that work. Ignoring what they're hoping for is also refusing to take responsibility for their emotional state, refusing to manage their feelings, refusing to make their comfort your job. Throughout the relationship, you probably managed their discomfort by adjusting your behavior to avoid triggering their withdrawal. You made yourself smaller to make them more comfortable. You suppressed your needs to prevent their fear from activating. Managing their emotional state was exhausting and it didn't work. They withdrew anyway, they ended the relationship anyway. Your management of their comfort didn't prevent them from hurting you. Ignoring what they're hoping for now is refusing to continue that pattern, is insisting that their feelings are theirs to manage, is making clear that you're not responsible for making them feel better about losing you, or about facing consequences of their patterns. Ignoring what they're hoping for is also trusting that what they need is different from what they want. What they want is comfort without growth, connection without vulnerability, relationship without risk. But what they need is discomfort that motivates change, consequences that force them to face their patterns, loss that's severe enough to drive them to therapy. Giving them what they want would prevent them from getting what they need. But ignoring what they want creates space where they might pursue what they need out of sheer desperation when the hoping isn't fulfilled. It's counterintuitive but true. The less you give them of what they're hoping for, the more likely they are to eventually pursue the help they actually need. Not guaranteed. Many avoidants never pursue therapy no matter how much pain they're in, but possible in ways that wouldn't be possible if you rescued them from their discomfort by providing what they're hoping for. The healthiest thing is also recognizing that what they're hoping for is about them maintaining control, and you ignoring their hoping is you taking your power back. Throughout the relationship, they had control. They controlled the pace of intimacy through their withdrawal. They controlled whether the relationship continued through their availability or unavailability. They controlled the dynamic through maintaining power position of being less invested. Your stopping the chase removed some of their control. But if you respond to what they're secretly hoping for, you'd be giving them control again. Control over your availability. Control over the terms of reconnection. Ignoring what they're hoping for maintains your control. Control over your own life. Control over your boundaries. Control over whether you're available and on what terms. The control isn't about winning or punishing. It's about recognizing that you have agency, you have choice, you have power over your own life that you were giving away when you were organized around their needs and their comfort and their patterns. Taking that power back by ignoring what they're hoping for is reclaiming yourself. What avoidants secretly hope you'll say when you stop chasing them reveals everything about their incapacity and nothing about what would actually make reconnection healthy. They're hoping for words that protect their defended state rather than challenge it, for approach that requires nothing from them while asking everything from you, for conditions that let them have connection without vulnerability. Understanding what they're hoping for is useful not because you should give it to them, but because understanding it clarifies why you shouldn't give it to them. Why they're hoping is evidence of continued incapacity. Why what they want is fundamentally incompatible with what partnership requires. They can hope all they want. Let them hope. Meanwhile, you speak your truth or maintain your silence based on what serves you, what protects you, what moves you forward into life that doesn't include someone who's hoping for impossible things, instead of doing difficult work of becoming someone capable of relationship. Their hoping is their problem. Your healing is your priority. Never confuse the two.